Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Howdy, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman. I will be one of your hosts for the next hour here at the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. Joining me in our cyber studio is, surprise, surprise, Greg Junkbond Carpenter. I was going to put in my announcements, Junkbond, that you were going to be back next week, but you never know what a spy's going to do. Jeff Johnson is manning the control panels. We'll be bringing him in with some Patrick Henry. We had an important anniversary this week we'll be discussing. And I had on the agenda today, this is what happens when you have your own hacker in your tent here. They kind of know when they're going to fit into the topic. We're going to be talking about privacy, cybersecurity, liberty versus safety, continuing a discussion I had on a lively debate with my good friend Paul Jensen on K-Talk yesterday. A little bit of some survival stories. There were two girls lost in a forest in California for 44 hours, 5 years old and 8 years old. A friend of mine shared a story with me yesterday from an incident that happened in Whole Foods. So if you read our little description and it says peace in parking lots, that is the result of me trying to text before I had one cup of coffee, two, my glasses on, and I meant to tell Jeff it was going to be per sec in parking lots, but this kind of is a way of keeping the peace as well. So we're just going to run with that. I'm going to get into a little bit of local legislation issues out here in Utah, and then we're going to dig right in with Junkbond and cybersecurity issues, Facebook censorship, and social credits in China coming to America. I have an announcement. We have a new website. I've got one, SuzanneCSherman.com. I am taking time in my Facebook hard time service here that I'm learning new skills. So when we get the radio network up and running, I will be able to hopefully contribute, but Greg will probably have me locked out of that. You never know. But we have a website for the network coming up as well. But please check me out. It's SuzanneCSherman.com. There you can find all my articles. Go into the pull down menu, Suzanne's articles. I've searched for them all for 10th Amendment Center, and it's really, really hard to find them. They seem to just disappear on that page. So I dug them all up, put them there. I've got the Abbeville Institute article as well as the first one that was published from the American Conservative. I'm delighted to say we have that running. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. We have a YouTube channel. We got some really good news about our followership. Listened on YouTube is really expanded. So thank you, all of you that are listening, and please subscribe. We have a live chat going on in YouTube. We also have a SoundCloud page. So if you cannot listen live, you can download all of our episodes there, including those by Greg Junkbond Carpenter, the Spy Who Loves Liberty, Liberty Minutes. I've got case in point. I just did another episode with Dave Benner. We talked about the landmark SCOTUS case, McCulloch versus Maryland. Unless you went to law school, you might not be familiar with that. Greg, you need to mute your mic. Pretty please mute your mic.
My bad.
We discussed McCulloch versus Maryland last week. Dave Benner and I did a special episode about the Hamilton and Marshall legacy. The expansion of this government goes on and on and on. And Jeff, let's just have you jump in right now with what we were going to talk about. What happened March 4th in 1789?
Well, the other day there was a bunch of posts I saw on Facebook that kind of prompted some thoughts on my part. There was a few people posting that on March 4th, and this is what happened on March 4th, 1789. The new general government was seated. So the Constitution was ratified. They seated the new government. We had the House, the Senate, we had a president, we had a Supreme Court. It was all put into operation on March 4th. So that was the anniversary that we celebrated the other day. And so
interject really quickly because I was on K-Talk yesterday. And as you know, out here in the LDS community in Utah, it is accepted that the Constitution was divinely inspired. And interestingly enough, we have an Article 5 convention that has been proposed by the Utah State Legislature. And it seems funny to me because when I had this conversation, even with Paul yesterday on K-Talk, I said, this is not divinely inspired. There's no evidence for that either biblically or historically. And he said, well, you know what? Even Joseph Smith said the Constitution didn't go far enough because, as we discussed, there's no enforcement mechanism in place if you violate the oath you take to uphold and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. So what we're hearing here is their own prophet has acknowledged that God made a mistake. Now, the God that I, as I understand him, doesn't make mistakes. And this is why I always say God in his infinite wisdom apparently recognized his own fallacies and left Article 5 as the option and means by which mere mortal man could perfect his doings. That being said, I'll let you carry on.
All right. So I made a post saying March 4th, 1789, the end of the Confederacy, or the end of Confederation and the beginning of consolidation. And those are important things. We were a confederation under the Articles of Confederation. It was, at that time, 13 states being nations that were confederated together in a union. And to prove my point, and I said, prove Patrick Henry and me wrong. And so here we go. Some Patrick Henry to explain consolidation and to warn about the Constitution. So all you folks out there that worship this document, listen to Patrick Henry in the ratification debates telling you what this was going to do. So this is from June 5th, 1788. Mr. Chairman, I rose yesterday to ask a question which arose in my own mind. When I asked that question, I thought the meaning of my interrogation was obvious. The fate of this question and of America may depend on this. Have they said, we the states? Have they made a proposal of a compact between states? If they had, this would be a confederation. It is otherwise most clearly a consolidated government. The question turns, sir, on that poor little thing, the expression, we the people, instead of the states of America. I need not take much pains to show that the principles of this system are extremely pernicious, impolitic, and dangerous. Is this a monarchy like England, a compact between a prince and people, with checks on the former to secure the liberty of the latter? Is this a confederacy, like Holland, an association of a number of independent states, each of which retains its individual sovereignty? It is not a democracy wherein the people retain all their rights securely. Had these principles been adhered to, we should not have been brought to this alarming transition from a confederacy to a consolidated government. We have no detail of these great considerations, which, in my opinion, ought to have abounded before we should recur to a government of this kind. Here is a revolution as radical as that which separated us from Great Britain. It is radical in this transition. Our rights and privileges are endangered, and the sovereignty of the states will be relinquished. And cannot we plainly see this is actually the case? The rights of conscience, trial by jury, liberty of the press, all your immunities and franchises, all pretensions of human rights and privileges are rendered insecure, if not lost, by this change, so loudly talked of by some and inconsiderately by others. Is this tame relinquishment of our rights worthy of free men? Is it worthy of that manly fortitude that ought to characterize Republicans, small r, not the party, Republicans in the form of government? I just had to add that in there. It is said that 8 states have adopted this plan. I declare that if 12 and a half states had adopted it, I would, with manly firmness, and in spite of an erring world, reject it. You have not to inquire how you are not to inquire how your trade may be increased, nor how you are to become a great and powerful people, but how your liberties can be secured. For liberty ought to be the direct end of your government. So Patrick Henry clearly warned of where we are today. So you're out there, if you can prove Patrick Henry and me wrong, please try.
Again, that goes directly to the show that I did with historian Dave Benner, again, author of the book Compact of the Republic and the 14th Amendment and the Incorporation Doctrine, where we discussed the role Alexander Hamilton played in the Philadelphia Convention. And when he realized this centralization plan that was proposed by Edmund Randolph and James Madison was going to be rejected at the Philadelphia Convention, the Virginia plan, he backed up and he proposed a federal system of government, but he was really a monarchist. He wanted us to go and emulate this system that we fought a war, and he was a key figure in helping us win to escape from under. So we have the pre-Constitution Alexander Hamilton and the post-constitutional Alexander Hamilton. I again encourage you to listen to that episode. John Marshall of the United States Supreme Court was present at the Virginia Ratification Convention, the debates. He knew it was promised to the people. Once he took his seat and put on his black robe, he went and did exactly the opposite of what was promised. And I've said this time and time again, if the communication abilities among the Jeffersonians in particular had been what we have available today, I propose there would have been a mass exodus for this new experiment. Remember, New York, it only passed by 3 votes. It barely passed there. Particularly now with our discussion about liberty, and this is a continuation again from what I had the discussion with Paul Jensen yesterday, the issue of the national emergency that's being proposed by Donald Trump to go around Congress, the refusal to fund a wall, is what Paul said, the government's obligation to provide safety for Americans. I don't recall from, again, my limited research, the safety being one of the central focuses or obligations of this government other than for a common defense. We have declared no war with any country south of the border. Yet it is a national emergency. And what I explained yesterday, which side is right? Well, I'll have to say both sides are right, depending on what perspective you're taking. If you're taking the Jeffersonian up to 1861 American perspective, where issues like immigration were retained by the states, they were not delegated to the general government, then the wall is in fact unconstitutional and unlawful. Well, if you want to argue your version of the Constitution post-Lincoln era, and we are one united state, it is, of course, incumbent upon the general government to provide safety for the American citizens, because that's the role of the centralization process that Jeff introduced today. So people
Suzanne,
that were, yeah.
May I interject something from Bali?
Really quick. One thing.
Okay, so I'm here training people from the United Nations, and 2 people that I'm working with at the UN were able to recite almost all of what Patrick Henry said, which Jeff just recited, and identified how the transition of the United States turned into the United State. Yeah. And how we turned into the Empire of America and became the imperialistic power that has dominated the world since then. These are people who have no clue about constitutional law in the United States or anything of that nature, but they know exactly what Patrick Henry said and what we have become.
And people just don't understand because of the false information going out. Again, I refer to you the trifecta of evil, that it's keeping us stupid by design: the government, the education system, and the media. And again, all of their information benefits the very entity that provides them with their funding, granting, licensing, everything else. So again, look at the double standard. I was addressing a call on the air yesterday where an irate caller said that Rand Paul should just go ahead and join the Democrats. So if you like what your party is doing, that's the version of the Constitution you're going to find acceptable. So if you're a Republican now and you're cheering on this national emergency power, and Paul actually took it a step further and said, well, you know, now that that's going to be shut down, he doesn't need that either. He's commander in chief of the armed forces. He can take army military spending funds and spend it down on the border if he wants to. And I just said, it's good to be king. So
let me read the actual sentence from the Constitution on that, because we talked about this before. And then I'll let you get into your commentary on it. The president shall be commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States.
And what I had said also was, look, if you think a wall's going to solve everything and you want to point the finger at the Democrats for putting this off and preventing this from happening, why don't you look at our greater pattern of behavior? Let me refer you to the show, The Spy Who Loves Liberty, with Junk Bond, who's with us in the studio, and also Booger. They talked about how we effectively destabilized. We talked about Venezuela in particular. So if you are not aware of our role in destabilizing that area, both politically with regards to the war on drugs, and then the magnet, combine that with the magnet we have enticing them to come here with the benefits. Our Supreme Court has said public schools must educate their children. We have a misinterpretation of the 14th Amendment with birthright citizenship. A wall in and of itself will fix nothing, yet that is taking the focal point of the attention, and justifiably so, because they really don't want to have an honest conversation of what we need to do to change our behavior to stop this crisis that I would say we had created. Anything else you want to add? Yeah.
Let me just comment on what I read, because I want to, people out there need to think about what I read about the commander-in-chief. The president is not commander-in-chief 365 days a year for 4 years of his term. He is only commander-in-chief when Congress declares war. So this whole notion that we have a commander-in-chief is false. It's public school propaganda, and that has to be addressed there. So I had to get that in before we moved on.
And that's why we're here, folks. You know, we're kind of trying to be the voice of reason and to give you an alternative. We're not motivated by huge profits. Yes, we'd love to have them, but there's a lot of money to be made by spewing the garbage that makes you feel good about yourself by just simply pointing the finger at the other side. What I called on the listeners yesterday on K-Talk and my people out here in Utah is we need to examine our own behavior. If you're a Republican, what has the Republican Party done to create this mess? It's never been more difficult to buy a firearm. We've never had more spending. We're not getting out of any of these wars, but that's okay. The people that screamed and that were up in arms, no pun intended, over Obama's proclamation that he has a pen and a phone and he will act where Congress fails to. Congress, by the way, stood up and clapped at their own castration live on national television, international television, I should say. So, you know, the answer is, what's the solution? I said, you know, I moved to the mountains and I'm prepping. I want to share a little bit of local news from here. Oh, actually, you know, what we were going to start with, Jeff, was an incident that happened. We talk about preparedness and survival skills and how important it is. I've talked about why we need to keep our children. You know, even if you're a city slicker, you can go out in the woods and go on hikes. Well, these kids lived near a forest. They were California sisters. They're 8 and 5 years old. And I recall when the story was announced that there was a search party, they lived by a forest and they were missing. Unfortunately, things being the way they are, I had a very different apprehension of where this story was going. I was thinking more along the lines of Polly Klaas, or perhaps the parents had done something to these poor kids, because we're really seeing a lot of that these days, unfortunately. However, thank God I was wrong. And here's a story right now. It's on all the news feeds, but I wanted to address it because this is really what we talk about here a lot on my show. And I like to say that, if you listen to the advice that we give you here, it can literally save lives. Two young sisters had survived for 44 hours in the wilderness of Northern California before they were found alive on Sunday. And they did so by using basic survival skills they learned at their local 4-H club. Basic survival skills. 5 and an 8-year-old were discovered at 10:30 by two firefighters who were able to follow their tracks and locate them. He said this is an absolute miracle. Their girls were found uninjured and in good spirits 1.5 miles from their home, located 70 miles south of Eureka, and that's in the northwestern part of the state. A lot of heavily wooded areas there. The officials were able to locate the girls after they found their boot prints at 8:30. After following the tracks, the responders reached an area and called out to the girls, and they responded. They were huddled together under a bush. The sisters were evaluated by medical personnel for dehydration and given water and warm, dry clothing. The sisters told officials they were following a deer trail when they became lost. At that point, when they realized they were lost, they decided to stay put. That's a crucial rule for adults as well. If you realize you are lost, stop moving, because if the search party's already out, they might have canvassed an area where you go to, and then they're not going to find you, or it's going to take a lot longer. So they decided to stay put, and they drank water from huckleberry leaves. This was something I believe their mom taught them. And a photo of the girls posted by the sheriff's office showed that it was being widely shared on media. They were wearing pink rubber boots, dirty jeans, long shirt, and a woolen cap. One of them had a jacket, and they stayed underneath that jacket. But the bottom line is they were taught some basic survival skills, meaning if you find you're lost, don't keep walking. Another thing that was important is if you know that somebody's missing, they asked you to please not just go out in the woods and search yourself, because you could disturb, as we've discussed on the show, tracks, and you can interfere with the success of the search. And again, they were taught to get water from the leaves. So this was their parents had taught them, 4-H had taught them this, and also they had watched some survival shows. I love watching those shows. While it's not a substitute for actually doing some research and learning, you can learn a lot from them. You guys have any thoughts on this? I thought it was a really cool story.
Well, I guess Greg's not going to comment, so I'll jump in. Because I saw you were still muted there, Greg. And if you folks out don't know, Greg is suffering in Bali right now. He's roughing it. So
look, Jeff,
don't feel too sorry for him.
Look, buddy, it's 95% humidity.
Yes, you're sweating. Sure. So here we are. This is where it's important. We talked the other day about teaching your daughters to defend themselves. Here's a second story about teaching. Unfortunately, these parents put them in 4-H, which is a great organization that teaches all manner of responsibility to young folks. And so here it is. In this organization, they learned about survival skills. You got to teach your children how to be self-sufficient. Don't let them go to the public schools and become drones.
That's a very good point, Jeff. Yeah, it's a really good point. Especially in American or U.S. society, with the overdependency on technology, people forget that basic survival skills are some of the most important things that we can teach our children that will help them in a real world scenario. technology is not perfect, and it's not going to be up and running every single day, 24/7, 365 days a year. It fails. And when it fails, we have to rely on what we know and what our skills are. There's no substitute for teaching children the same things that we learned as children, because technology will fail. It's failed before, it's going to fail again. There have been catastrophic failures before, and in the future, there will be catastrophic failures again. The only way to help ensure the best outcomes for children, adults, or anyone are to ensure that they understand exactly what to do in those worst case scenarios.
Yeah, can I just say something? Just as an example, look what happened down south with this tornado. Do you think that these children, I mean, there's some survival skills that need to be learned after the destruction down there? Wouldn't you say, Suzanne?
Absolutely. In fact, we've had Arthur T. Bradley join us a couple times, and we talked about preparedness for tornadoes. There was a family I just saw, sadly, a mutual friend from a friend of mine, Tommy Daniels, who was one of the speakers at the SCV education conference where I spoke yesterday. One of the supporters, a family from Sons of Confederate Veterans, was killed in this onslaught from the tornado, and there was absolutely nothing that they could have done to defend themselves and stay safe in that situation. That being said, if you do survive, there are some skills that you should know, just some basic rules and things to do. And if you have a shelter and you are able to stay in there until help comes, I mean, let's face it, there are times when you will require assistance from others, be it the government emergency agencies or just people in your community. Have some water, have some ways to keep warm. Don't walk around without shoes. Watch out for live wires and that sort of thing. So anyway, this story, I want to wrap that up. It was a great scenario. We had a really good outcome because the kids had learned some basic survival skills. The parents, the father had given them an admonition never to walk past a felled tree that was on their property. So that was their boundary. But again, we have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. The 5-year-old sister said to her older sister that she wanted a little bit more of an adventure. And the 8-year-old, well, they got one, but the 8-year-old, once this had happened, told her to think happy thoughts, think about good things with the family. She stayed and watched guard all night long while her sister tried to sleep, and kept her sister's mental state in that survival mode. So good on her. We have talked before, the most important survival tool you have is your brain. And this girl used it and kept her sister safe overnight. So kudos to these young ladies. Couple issues out here locally. I'm going to share a story that a friend told me about yesterday. But before that, quick legislative updates. Utah legislature has decided there will be no red flag laws that will be put up for debate, discussion, or vote here in Utah, at least for this legislative year. We're going to have some misdemeanors that will be automatically expunged from the records. HB 57. I'm sorry, that's a different one, HB 57, sorry. But some records of crimes will be automatically expunged in the interest of allowing those who have certain minor offenses not have to face that stigma once they have paid their debt to society for said crime. This is an interesting one, Greg, and after I get into a quick story that a friend of mine shared, we'll get into that. But we have HB 57, which is going to protect digital data without a warrant. Given that we just had one of the co-owners of Utah Gun Exchange arrested and civil asset forfeiture put into place based on a warrant from a confidential and an anonymous source, I don't have a lot of faith in the whole requirement for a warrant anyway. So it's better than other news. Interestingly enough, Utah's also putting forth an Article 5 Constitutional Convention suggestion. So it'll be interesting to see where that comes. I can do a show on that in and of itself. And because Greg's here today, I want to get over to some cybersecurity issues as well. After I share this story from yesterday, I have a friend on Facebook that has a personal defense business out here in Park City, Progressive Defensive Tactics. And I was thinking of him as my friend was sharing this story. She was in a parking lot at Whole Foods out here in Park City, and she was waiting for a parking spot for about 3 minutes. And right as she was about to pull into it, a gentleman in a Porsche Cayenne just went right in front of her and took the spot. So when he got out of the car, I guess she was looking at him. I don't know if she gave me a complete accurate assessment of the whole situation, but you know, what she told me was she was standing there and she looked at him, and he said the man was all of a sudden irate, started cussing at her. "What the F are you looking at?" And she said, "Well, I don't think you realize that we were waiting for that spot for about 3 to 4 minutes, and you just went right in and took it from us." And he started cussing her out and got really close to her. And then he started walking into the store and then turned around, and she said, came right back calling her some very foul words, and then she put her hand right up to her face and said, "He was right here screaming at me." Well, from somebody that thinks about personal security all the time, I told her, you know, you cannot allow somebody to get that close to you that's already proven hostile intention. Your survival at that point was entirely in his hands. He could have had a knife. He could have had other weapon. He could have just used his own hands to do you some serious harm. I said, you need to get some training. You need to have a mindset. And I want to refer you. I told her also about the book that we've been discussing, Colonel Jeff Cooper, his book, Principles of Personal Defense. I said, you cannot allow somebody to get this close to you. She says, well, I didn't know what to do. I said, as they're approaching, put your hands out when he's still far away and say, that's enough. Make a noise in the parking lot, yell, scream, tell him to back off, tell him not to. I said, he's very lucky it was somebody like you that just stood there and did nothing. I said, if somebody had already shown me hostile intent, I would have drawn my gun on him. If somebody's coming that close, and she goes, I didn't know what I could do to defend myself. Let me remind you, the use of lethal force is justified if you have a fear of imminent, immediate, serious bodily injury or death. Is it reasonable to assume somebody coming at you completely out of their minds, calling you all these words, getting in your face, might want to harm you? Is lethal force justified? I don't know. But what if you did nothing and that person did stab you and you died? Moral of the story, I think it's best not to confront somebody over a parking spot. Would you gentlemen like to weigh in on this one?
I would love to weigh in on that before Jeff does. Parking spots are arbitrary things. I usually pull into a parking lot, and I like to park far away from everybody else. I will take the furthest parking spot because people with attitudes and an unjust belief that they are entitled to the closest spot like to pull up towards the front and jockey for position. Even people looking for the handicap spots, some of those limited handicap spots, will fight with each other as to who is more justified in having the entitlement to get into a handicap spot. I have neither the time nor the inclination to waste any of my emotional interest in anything like that at any point of my day. I will park as far away as possible and walk the extra 50 feet or 60 feet so I don't have to deal with people who believe they are part of an entitled group. And I will justify that every single time. Jeff, go ahead.
All right. Well, I'm just going to address something Suzanne said in this whole thing. If this guy's coming at you, and Suzanne, you said you would have drawn your firearm. Okay, that's fine. I'm not commenting on that part of it. Here's the thing. If you're in a car and you're with somebody else and you're giving this guy command to stop and you are going to draw your firearm, your first words out of your mouth after you told him to stop should be to tell your person in the car with you to call 911.
Yes.
Because the second you draw that firearm, the police better be on the way, because now you have escalated this, and it's a proper escalation. This is not a discussion about that. But you have escalated to the point of threatening deadly force to end this confrontation. If you do not call, if that guy does call, they will come in to arrest you for brandishing.
I agree. And let me be really clear.
Make sure you're on the phone right away, 911, get the police there, because you have drawn a firearm. This woman also was not in her vehicle. She was outside her vehicle and very exposed. So you have to take in, I mean, this is why I say it is so incumbent upon you, if you do carry a firearm, that you make sure you avoid confrontations completely, because something like that can escalate. I was in Salt Lake City one time and we had pulled over. My son was driving and we needed to find some directions. And I heard this screaming right behind the vehicle. I saw this one gal, she was walking, and I noticed her just because of how she looked. She had this weird purple hair and all this goth stuff. And she's just walking down the sidewalk, minding her own business. And now there's this man. He had, it was summer, so he had an open shirt. You could see his body, and he was out of his mind, screaming and screaming and screaming at her. And I saw that he went by, and now he turned his attention to us. And now he's approaching and coming closer to the vehicle. I did not draw on him, but I did subtly take my gun out of my holster. I could see that there was not a gun in front of him, but then again, we drove off. I never initiated any contact with him when he was yelling at this girl. I saw it was just yelling, but you know, we beat a hasty retreat. It's not worth getting into it with these people, because you don't know what's going to happen, even if you have a justified shooting. From the people that I know who have shot to save their own lives and the lives of others and taken a life, 30 years later, it is still haunting them. So pick your battles, ladies and gentlemen. And again, if you do have to use force to defend yourself, you better, again, there were plenty of witnesses here and saw what this man was doing. She's very lucky she wasn't hurt. And so that's my take on that. This can happen anywhere. Park City is an area that you think is very safe. And I submit to you, there was just an armed robbery. We talked about that, Jeff, where we like to hang out right there in Kimball Junction. And these people had already killed somebody in a carjacking in Colorado. They went on a crime spree in Utah, Colorado, Idaho, and were arrested in Oregon. So, you know, it's a tough one. I think the best strategy is to avoid these confrontations, even if you're polite and say, you know, we were waiting for that parking spot. You just don't know these days what's going to happen. Let's turn the discussion over to some cybersecurity issues. Earlier in the week, Junk Bond, I was talking about Facebook and how they have written into their code, I guess, this deboosting code that goes into certain sites. And you and I had this discussion that based on your demographics that they obviously store, and they've categorized all of us, there are certain things that you can say and that you cannot say. And now they are just deboosting posts. And we're having this issue of having a horrible time getting our message out there, show announcements on social media, particularly Facebook. I'm seeing some other stuff here too. How many of you have put in your phone number so you can log on easier? I resisted that for years. I've been locked out so many times with my password issues. I finally was told, yeah, go ahead. It'll make it easier. And now Facebook apparently has an option where people can search and find you from your phone numbers. Facebook doesn't allow phone number lookup opt-out. I never even knew that you could look people up from their phone numbers. Do you have anything to say about that, Junk Bond?
Oh, sure. As a matter of fact, Facebook is a compromiser of any and all data that you might have. So anytime you have something that you put into Facebook, it can be and will be immediately shared with U.S. intelligence services, as well as many of the other providers out there and other intelligence services around the world. It is a collection platform for different governments, and they use it very efficiently, I might add. And they're not shy about the fact that they collect information from Facebook. They don't talk about it, but they won't deny it because Facebook has so much information. Think about everything and anything that you put into Facebook. You remember the 10-year challenge. Well, the 10-year challenge, what does that do? That takes your picture. Okay, 10 years from now, what are you going to look like? Question mark. Okay, well, they run this algorithm that says, okay, this is what you're going to look like. But from there, they've already marked you, they've tracked you, they've identified you. And now, if anybody actually happens to be working with any type of a intelligence service or something like that, all those people are completely compromised. They can go back and see what they expected you to look like when you were a child. Your whole life is compromised. You have no privacy whatsoever. So understand, when you put something into Facebook, it's like sharing it immediately with the whole world. And the same thing with some of the other social media platforms. Uh, they work together and they share information just as openly and freely between each other, as well as sharing the information with other governments. So you have no place to hide. Once you've put information out there, the information, it's not lost somewhere. The internet does not forget who you are. You can use a number of services. One of them I like to tell people to take a look at is called the Wayback Machine, and it will show you what a website looked like 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ago. And sometimes it will index what's on that website 3 or 4 times a day. It can show everything, all of your interaction. If you happen to be running a blog of some kind, all that information is taken and stored. It doesn't go away over time. It is stored and it's shared by a number of different types of uh, businesses that are looking to increase their profit margin, and as well as different intelligence agencies that are looking to identify inconsistencies and pull out different spies and people of interest, as well as for good purposes for law enforcement to identify a criminal or something like that. But it is a massive, massive, massive collection of data in one database that's used for good and for bad.
We're going to cover a little bit of that, what it's good for, what the bad stuff. But I want to refer you to an article in PC. Facebook continues to be in damage control mode due to a number of high-profile privacy gaffes recently. Of course, we all are familiar with the Cambridge Analytica debacle, but now it turns out they've been paying teens in return for spying on them. Are you familiar, Greg, with a VPN service? Apparently, it's being shut down completely. Apparently, it was an app and it existed to keep data private while you browse the web, haha. But at the same time, the app tracked you and sent information back to Facebook. By August, Facebook had voluntarily pulled Onavo Protect from the iOS after Apple decided it violated the App Store rules. However, the app continued to be offered to Android users. So here we have people reporting each other, and I guess they're following you. And what can the end result be? Well, we're seeing this in China right now we have discussed this before, the social credit system. To this date, it has blocked 23 million purchases of train and plane tickets using a social credit system. The information they garner from vast surveillance network and a database system designed to punish Chinese for poor citizenship. Again, 17.5 million airplane tickets, 5.5 million train tickets. If you think that is a problem that's just going to be in China,
you've got another thing coming.
Let's see. We have Real ID here. So also your passport can be suspended if you don't pay taxes. So we have Real ID. We have a no-fly list. Now we're looking to ban gun owners from purchasing firearms that are on this no-fly list. We have extreme risk protection orders, mental disorders disqualifying people from firearms. Yeah, go ahead.
New York was Cuomo wanted them to introduce some legislation that you would have to give them your social media history to buy a firearm. So, I mean, the social credit thing is coming.
Yeah.
Well, this is already in place because in order to travel, TSA is authorized to review all of your social media input before they allow you to pass through their security site. So they can stop you right to the point before you get on a plane because you have social media input that says one thing or another. That's to the point of ridiculous. Now, Herr Cuomo, right, is one time, two time, three times a communist, and has exceeded many of the authorities that are limited in the New York State Constitution by far. Being a former New York State resident, I actually read the New York State Constitution, and I know it's crazy, but New York State does have a constitution. Now, whether or not they use it, I mean, that's up to them. But Herr Cuomo has exceeded his authority almost to the point of being a dictator now, saying that he wants this to happen or that to happen. But the idea of what he has purported is starting to gain a little bit of momentum in some of the other states. And people are starting to say, okay, you know what? This is a good idea. And this is what happens when people are willing to sacrifice all their liberty for just a little bit of what we like to call the illusion of security. There's no real additional security that's being put into anything. Do you think you've been saved from any additional terrorist attacks since 9/11? I've worked in the intelligence community since before 9/11. And I'll tell you right now, there's nothing special has happened to save your butts from being blown up or being shot or anything like that TSA has stopped or any other part of the Department of Helpless Security has done to save you from some terrorist activity that the local police or county police or state police couldn't have solved on their own. It is the illusion of security that makes people feel more comfortable with themselves. And again, it's very selfish. It fits into the United States mantra of it's all about me. I want to feel safe about my life, about what I can do with my life, not anything else.
The comparison there is where you say the illusion of safety.
Mm-hmm.
When and this is the conversation we had yesterday on K Talk. Well, if Americans can't be safe, they can't have liberty. And my question as well, how do you guarantee liberty without, or how do you guarantee safety and still do it without compromising liberty? You can't.
Yeah, it's BS.
And that's
Let
what
me read this quote that we talked about yesterday, Suzanne, from Benjamin Franklin. So we're going back in time again. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety.
And while we have the illusion of safety, the reality, and this is irrefutable, your stuff is being gone through. You're being groped. You're being pulled aside. If they find something objectionable, they're going to throw it away. They're going to take you aside and fine you. You know, this is the reality. Now they're checking your social media. I'm always critical of the TSA, and I used to joke on Facebook, oh, I can't believe I was able to get on another plane. Oh, I can't believe I was able to buy a gun. But this is very, very real. And we have these social credits in China. Again, everything they do is monitored and fed into a vast data processing system that computes citizen scores for them. Do you think that everything we are doing is not being tracked here? If you do not, you are out of your mind.
Coming to a state near you.
It's already been here. You know, they're talking about travel privileges. This is really interesting. They quote, The Guardian noted that one of the early design documents for the system its objective would be to allow the trustworthy to roam everywhere under heaven while making it hard for the discredited to take a single step. To me, this is almost like the technological version of Saul Alinsky.
I think it's totally realistic.
Yeah, marginalize, discredit, isolate.
Everything that's right. So there's so much information that's been collected and categorized, scrutinized, that it's pretty much already going on. That's how you get selected for additional screening, like for TSA or something like that. I don't want you to think that, just because. So back in the day, let me put it like this. When I first was involved with these security systems, these new super high-tech systems that were, let's just say, introduced by the company that was run by Tom Ridge, the first director of Homeland Security, which is where we got these high-speed security systems at the airports from, okay? That's his company, by the way. They don't work. They never worked. They cannot see through mass. So, for example, I came to Malaysia and Indonesia, and I brought many copies of one of the books that I co-authored. We were distributing them to the trainees at the United Nations training that we were conducting. And they have no idea. They stopped me. They said, oh, okay, you have to open this suitcase. What's in it? So, well, there's books in there. Sure. Okay, Mr. Carpenter, open it. So I open it, and there's books in there. The system it doesn't have the ability to actually identify what is an item of threat. It can identify density, and that's it. So don't think for a second that it's any better than the old metal detectors that you were walking through years ago. It's part of selling a product that is a faulty product that doesn't work, that's created by someone who's part of the DC system. That's what it's all about. It has nothing to do with your safety. And this is what we talk about when we talk about the illusion of security. There is no additional security. It is a full-blown, all-American line of BS. And you're not going to be any safer from walking through that big 3D super scanner thing because it can't identify anything. Anything I wanted to use, anything I wanted to put together to actually take over an aircraft can be obtained once you go through security. When you walk inside and you pass security and you sit in one of those restaurants, don't they give you a fork and a knife if you're eating something in there that's bigger than any knife that TSA took from you because it was a security threat?
I was actually at an airport, I forgot which one, and they only had plastic utensils in there. But you can get steel tip pens in there. I tell people wear a survival bracelet made of paracord because those can be used to restrain or strangle somebody if you need to. I have a weird mind about stuff like this.
It's a survival mind.
It really is. It's like, what?
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
because you can use those to slice through shoelaces if you're
Yep.
ever, you know, or you can use them as shoelaces and get through zip ties. Conversely, if you have to use it as a garrote and maybe pull back and forth a couple times, there's your trachea. Let me get into a little. I'm kind of a scary girl, aren't I? But we're kind of getting back.
That's
to
why we love you.
I know, thank you. But getting back into how accustomed we are, because I know I have to wrap it up here. We are accustomed to credit checks. Data brokers such as Experian, the article says, and Breitbart, trace timely manner in which we pay our debts. Of course they should. People should know what kind of a credit risk they're getting into if they choose to do business with us. We have a credit score. We have social style scores as well. Look, if you go on eBay or if you go on Amazon, you rate your transactions. Uber, Lyft, you rate each other. Think of that show, The Black Mirror, where every transaction was combined with facial recognition software for a score. China's social credit system expands that idea to all aspects of life. I submit to you that's being done here, judging your behavior and trustworthiness. Caught jaywalking. We have cameras everywhere on the streets now. What? To keep us safe. If you don't pay a court bill, if you play your music too loud on the train, you could lose certain rights, such as booking a flight or a train ticket. The idea itself, this is what's so scary here, is not a Chinese phenomenon. But if the Chinese system does come together as envisioned, it could still be something very unique. Here we go. It's both unique and part of a global trend. Well, it can't be both, I submit to you. It's going to be the latter. The result increasingly resembles a softball version of China's major league surveillance state. Political considerations are invoked to ban people and business entities from accessing financial services. You can't fly if your social credit score is low. In America, states have suggested using a no-fly list to rescind Second Amendment rights. I hate that term. But again, this is coming our way. Facial recognition software combined with this surveillance. Again, I'm on, after I did those two shows on cultural Marxism and identity Stalinism, I got a Facebook ban for 30 days for a comment in an unforgotten post by the entire rest of the world that was 8 years old. Then a couple weeks ago, I did another show critical of Facebook censorship. Another 8-year-old comment forgotten to the rest of the universe. I have another 30-day ban. I'm serving part of them concurrently, so I should be done by the end of the month. I've kind of just resigned myself to just trying to stay off of this thing. But these comments don't go anywhere. Facebook used to be a free-for-all with no community standards, everybody ranting and raving, and now they are retroactively applying contemporary community standards to those of us whose message they seek to silence.
Really, what is this? What is the statute of limitations?
Apparently,
there comment on Facebook.
There is not one. YouTube, by the way, just terminated a guy named Don Shipley's channel because he's the guy that exposed Nathan Phillips' stolen ballot. So there's be more of the same. We're out of time. Junk Bond, I'm delighted that you joined us. Hopefully you'll be available. We're hoping to do a show as well on Thursday and Friday this week. On behalf of the rest of us here at the Cerberus Radio Network, I want to thank you for listening.